All right, board meeting. And we are going to start right off with our student representative updates. First, I've got down from West High, Jaden Shin. Jaden, are you here? All right. Let's go on then to City High. We have Mary Kate Pugh. One of these months we're going to get it right, Mary Kate.
All right.
Did Ari come with you, or are you on your own today?
I'm on my own.
All right.
Ari's at wrestling practice. So, okay. I'll start out by talking about our sports. So, girls swimming and diving had their state meet this past week and competed very well. And then on the 29th of October was the state cross-country meet, and both the girls teams and the boys teams qualified for that. And our senior Ford Washburn came in second overall, which was very exciting. And then boys and girls wrestling are off to a great start. They both started practices now. And the girls have their first meet tonight at City High. And then basketball season has also started practicing. 4 of our seniors signed letters of intent to compete at D1 schools this week. So that was very cool to watch. Moving on to the arts, our fall play was a great success. Students performed Peter and the Starcatcher, which was like a Peter Pan backstory. That took place last couple days of October, and we had a great turnout at all of the 3 performances. And then our Veterans Day concert is tonight for the choral music. That's a great tradition that I'm pretty sure only City High does to recognize veterans and to honor them for this holiday. And then show choir is practicing. We had our works in progress a couple weeks ago, and now we're working towards our performance for the winter show, which will take place on December 17th with the jazz bands and then individual or duet student performances. Orchestra had a concert a little bit ago, and Southeast actually joined them. So that was cool. There was a lot of performers on the stage at once. Our art show is taking place tomorrow, so all students in the art department have a chance to showcase their work and sell it if they choose to do so. So that will take place in the art room. Anybody's welcome, by the way, if you want to go check it out. We had all-state auditions, and many musicians and singers made that, which is a great thing. They put in a lot of work to that. All right, and then Student Senate is organizing a can drive to take place on December 10th, 11th, 17th, and 18th at both the First Ave and North Dodge Hy-Vees, and all proceeds from that will go to the Crisis Center. And then Interact Club is putting on a winter coat drive, and coincidentally, our fashion club also plans to do the exact same thing. So we have 2 coat drives going on. And then our environmental club throughout the year has been working to compost our food. So we now have bins in the lunchroom and the culinary room, and students volunteer each week to do composting. So we're all working together for that. That's about it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Next up from Liberty High, Lauren Vogt or Santiago Fajardo Casar. I don't see either of them in the audience. And then Tate High. I didn't know if anybody was here from Tate. All right. Then we will move on to our ICEA update. Brady.
Thanks. Are these slides? No. I get to use my teacher voice in the meeting. So, Vice President Williams, acting president for tonight, Director, Superintendent Degner, I would, on behalf of ICA, just like to express appreciation for the legislative priorities that we'll look at later in the meeting. I would definitely say that I would imagine we're the only district, and I'm very proud about this, that has the restoration of the collective bargaining as one of the priorities. And I want you to know that that does mean a lot to all of your employees. And we do really well in collaborating and being great partners together, but putting that out there to the public as a matter of recruiting and retaining employees, I think is really, really important. It states what our values are, and so I definitely just thank you for doing that. Kristen and her team it looks awesome. So thanks for doing that. It really is fantastic. So, it's really, there's a campaign that ISEA is doing that says it's not about the D, it's not about the R, it's about the E. And I sort of like that. And we do have some opportunities. Obviously, the election happened and composition of the parties changed a little bit, but there are 38 new legislators in the House and 13 in the Senate. So we do have a chance, I think, to build some partnerships and work together to, just build a strong coalition around public education. And I think what will be some tough times, and I look forward to doing that. So thanks for for your efforts in prioritizing that. That does mean a lot.
Thank you. All right, we will move now on to community comment. Thank you for your interest in the Iowa City Community School District and for your willingness to share your comments. You are reminded to give your name, address, and topic on which you would like to speak. During community comment, persons may speak to the board about topics relevant to the district. All community comment directed at non-agenda items and agenda items shall take place at the beginning of the meeting and shall be limited to 4 minutes per speaker. The initial community comment period shall be limited to 1 hour. Remaining community comment, to the extent necessary, shall take place at the end of the meeting, and to the extent that you are commenting on items not on our posted agenda, the board may ask follow-up questions of speakers, but it is prohibited by the Iowa Open Meetings Law from responding to questions from speakers or from engaging in substantive discussions regarding non-agenda items. Tonight we just have one person that's indicated they want to speak, and that would be Joseph Dobrian. So Mr. Dobrian, please come up and give your community comment.
Joseph Dobrian, 1015 2nd Avenue. I call the board's attention to an article in the district's November 2022 Equity Newsletter. Quoting, "While Thanksgiving for some is a time of celebration, we must not forget that for many Native American and Indigenous individuals in our community, it is often a time of mourning or reflection on past generational trauma. We urge everyone to take time during the fall break to learn more about Native American and Indigenous stories and history. A Racial Justice Guide to Thanksgiving is a comprehensive set of resources for educators, families, and students," end quote. The article goes on to provide links to other articles with such titles as "The Thanksgiving Tale We Tell is a Harmful Lie. As a Native American, I've found a better way to celebrate the holiday." I have read these articles, and they all promote a narrative such as you might expect from the title I just read you. The newsletter also points the reader to a so-called lesson plan called Recognizing Native American Perspectives, Thanksgiving and the National Day of Mourning. Let that sink in. The National Day of Mourning. The purpose of this propaganda is clear: to weaponize the Thanksgiving holiday to further the causes of racial polarization, hatred of our heritage, and destruction of our shared culture. Thanksgiving celebrations are common to peoples all over the world. The American Thanksgiving is especially beloved because, above all, it's a unifying holiday, a holiday for all Americans to come together and give thanks for our country, for the harvest, for the bounty of God's love. It's a holiday for all races and ethnicities, for all religions, and for people with no religion. It also celebrates the cooperation between the English Pilgrims and the indigenous Wampanoag people. The Pilgrims had just made landfall after an unimaginably difficult crossing of the Atlantic Ocean. The Wampanoag had just experienced several years of famine and disease. The Wampanoag were glad to see the Pilgrims because they brought manpower and other resources. The Wampanoag chief Samoset greeted the Pilgrims with a phrase he had learned for the occasion: "Welcome, Englishmen." The Pilgrims, in turn, counted on the Wampanoag for advice on hunting and farming in this new environment. Among other things, our Thanksgiving holiday commemorates this relationship of friendship and mutual assistance, and gives thanks for it. Thanksgiving is odious to people who wish to divide and destroy our society. I suggest that behind this article in the Equity Newsletter is a desire to make young people uncomfortable with Thanksgiving, because to a certain element in this country, The very concept of gratitude is hateful. So is happiness. You cannot be happy unless you are grateful. And the element that largely controls public education in this country relies on manufactured unhappiness, resentment, and division to promote their nihilistic agenda. I conjure you, do not continue to give these people a platform within the control of this district. God love you.
All right, and that concludes community comment today, and we will move into agenda approval. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
And a second. All right, Kim, I think we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
All right, so first up is consent agenda. Before we get to the consent agenda, did anybody have any questions about the bills? All right, I am seeing a bunch of heads shaking in the negative. So consent. Would anybody like to pull anything from consent?
I don't want to pull anything. I just want to mention that as far as questions about the bills, the board has an opportunity to review them and to ask questions about them in advance of the meeting. So for the purpose of the public's understanding of our role, it isn't that we don't ask questions, it's that we get those questions answered before we come in. Most of the time.
Absolutely.
Then I am not seeing that anybody wants to pull anything from consent. Is there a motion?
I'll move.
Second?
Second.
Kim, we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
All right, we have two public hearings. The first one is for the district calendars. Now is the time and place for the public hearing on the proposed ICCSD 2023 to 2024, 2024 to 2025, and 2025-2026 district calendars. The purpose of the public hearing is to receive public input on the district's proposed calendars. As part of a rolling 3-year calendar system, the board will approve the 2023-2024 district calendar and acknowledge the draft 2024-2025 and 2025-2026 district calendars at the November 29, 2022 annual meeting. Are there any comments from the board? Seeing none, are there any comments from the public? All right, seeing none, we will close that public hearing. And we will move on to our second public hearing, which is the Southeast Junior High Middle School project. Now is the time and place for the public hearing on the proposed plans and specifications for the Southeast Junior High Middle School project. The Board of Directors set the date for this public hearing on October 25th, 2022. Notice of public hearing was published in the Iowa City Press Citizen on October 26, 2022. The district will receive bids on this project at 2:00 p.m. December 1st, 2022 at the Facilities Management Conference Center, 1137 South Riverside Drive, Iowa City, Iowa. Notice to contractors was published as required by law in multiple statewide plan rooms and on the Iowa City Community School District website on October 26, 2022. Are there any questions from the board? Seeing none, are there any questions from the public? All right, then we will go ahead and close that public hearing. We will move on then to our policy review. We've got 3 policies that we were reviewing, and Matt, am I turning that over to you?
Yes, thank you, Director Williams. I do have a microphone, so some of our team's microphones may work, so surprise. I don't think yours are working though still, but we'll project easier over here. The 3 policies you have in front of you, I'll just kind of talk about them generally here, and then you guys can take them one by one for your discussion if you'd like. But we had talked in our board retreat about open enrollment and the change, not really a change with athletic ineligibility, but that the date for open enrollment had changed, which has created a lot more of these scenarios. And what we're getting into is students moving at different times of the year and then asking for that 90-day ineligibility period to be waived, which is the change, right? That the state has now allowed local boards to decide on that. So what we really landed on in that conversation, or the direction our team took, was that if we were going to be receiving a student from another district, that we would mirror that sending board's decision. So if that board has agreed that there is a circumstance that precipitated the need to waive that athletic ineligibility for that student, then we would follow suit. If they said that it needed to be held up and they weren't willing to waive the ineligibility, then again, we would respect that decision and mirror that decision. Now, for us as a sending district, for a student that would be leaving our district, the guidance that we would try to follow are those state-identified good cause exceptions, which is basically the standard as it was before for districts to work by. So things like bullying and harassment, enrollment in a substance abuse treatment program, a legitimate change in a family residence, all of those factors that would be in there that are identified in code. And so these two policies in front of you really reflect that, that sentiment. Apologies for earlier today, we had some incorrect documents up there, so if any of the public had seen that, but these do reflect our conversation here. And so we put those there for the first reading this evening, and then the expectation would be they would be read again at the November 29th meeting and voted on for approval at that point. But as you saw in our consent agenda tonight, we're basically applying these in spirit in the meantime. So any questions on those two, maybe before I talk about the fundraising? All right, and then 504, the student fundraising policy. This is one that we had talked about in our policy and governance committee meeting, and really talking about large fundraisers in the school district. So those fundraisers that would go over that $5,000 threshold, that those would really be handled by our foundation, who is our fundraising arm of the organization, and then also for large gifts of over $1,000. I will say that as we've continued to talk about this one, there may need to be an administrative regulation that follows. I think even in that meeting, you guys identified some components where we're going to have to probably spell out some continual procedures about how we would handle circumstances that aren't included in this policy. So while we would like to get this from an umbrella perspective and rooted in policy, there could be an administrative guideline or regulation that we'd like to follow up with that to propose to you at a later date too. But I think for the purposes of setting the foundation of how we'd like to handle issues in the future, that's the policy. Again, we're presenting there to you for first reading at this meeting, second reading at the November 29th meeting, and then hopeful action for approval at that meeting as well. Any questions there I can answer? All right. We're going to turn this over to our Teach and Learning Director team to talk to this evening. Deputy Superintendent Kortmeyer is not with us tonight, but we do have our annual progress report, our school counseling, SEL self-study plan, the same for physical education, and then the PowerPoint that's uploaded there for you onto board docs. If you remember, we do these on an annual basis and provide an update. It looks at achievement data, discipline data, some district overview information, and so a pretty good analysis of kind of the year that was. It's a look backwards for the past school year, and as we look at that, and so of course the team will go through a presentation, answer any questions that you may have, and you all have nice binders there that they put together for you too, and the one thing that's probably missing in there that we would consider part of this kind of overview of teach and learning would be our program of studies, but we've traditionally handled that at the organizational meeting in November, and so that'll be an inclusion you'll get at the next meeting. But with that, the team I think is going to stay seated so we don't have a carousel of people coming up to the microphone back and forth. Hopefully their microphones work out there, and we'll turn it over to them.
All right, well, thank you, Matt, for introducing this work. Lucas and Carmen and I are going to take a lot of the APR and some of the curriculum pieces, and then directors are going to backfill some of the information within their book. So I hope you had a chance to look at the 59 pages of information that were loaded into board docs and have a chance to look over some of that. And so please hold on to your questions until the end, and we will do our best to answer those for you. Throughout the evening, we are going to do these 3 objectives. We're going to go through our annual progress report. We're going to give you some curriculum reports and then have an opportunity for you to ask any questions of anybody on our team. So the beginning part of our APR goes through our district achievement data from the 21-22 school year. It goes through our annual SIAC committee report, and we'll also talk a little bit about our annual wellness report. Then we will have Carmen talk through our curriculum reports with our social emotional learning and school counseling and our physical education reports. The beginning of our APR goes through our certified enrollment, and you can see on this slide and then more in depth in the actual progress report. You can see our certified enrollment and the difference between the 2021 school year and 21-22 school year. We have our FRL data for the 2021 and 21-22 school year there as well. You can see that increase of 2.3%. And then we also have our race and ethnicity breakdown. One thing that we wanted to provide to the board and the public this year, different than years past, is to really break down all of our data by those subgroups. And so you'll see in almost every single place that we reported data out within the APR that the data was broken down by subgroups so that we can look at how we're doing in all of our systems to support all of our students. You can also see our demographics with our students that are entitled to special education services from 2017 to 18, and then that jump to 21-22 just to see that growth over time, as well as our ELL students and our students that are involved in our preschool programs.
All right, I'm going to try and use my teacher voice here, so in case this does not work. Oh, maybe it does. All right, okay. So for the year 2022, we had our students, all of our students took their ISAPS test on site. The year before that, we had some students had the choice of taking it outside, and our OP students, online students took it online. But for this year, we offered for all the students to take it, so some students took it here at the district office and others at home school. All of our students took it on site. In comparison to 2021, our scores did go up this year in all of our areas. So if you really look at just the band, the 3 to 6, 7 to 8, and then 9 to 12, 9 to 11 band, you see that as an increase in those scores from 2021 to 2022. And then for math, we did see our students' growth above state average in math for grades 6, 7, 9, 10, and 11. And similar to that for ELA, also for language arts for readings, we did see a growth also for our students in pretty much all of our grade levels. Then in comparison also for secondary, you can just right before you switch to there, for secondary too, with the exception of 8th grade, all of our secondary students did score at or above grade average.
Carmen was on a roll. I was just going to let her keep going into my slide. I'll go ahead and review my portions, which include the ACT, the AP test results, as well as the college course enrollment, as well as the junior high FAST data. As Liza mentioned, that data has been disaggregated by our subgroups. And one thing that I did want to highlight with our ACT scores in particular is every subgroup that we have within our district averages were higher than the averages of our state, as well as nationally. So just a couple of points to highlight with that.
Okay, I think I'll take it from here then. When looking at the behavior data, you're going to notice that office referrals and then those resulting in suspensions have declined over the past 4 years. But what I'd also want you to note is in that year, 2020-21, obviously the district shut down in March, and I think you'll see that that's reflected. And then also in 2021, in that year, we also had the different modes of learning taking place in 21-22, I believe that is. So that's also reflected. But generally, you'll see a decline with suspensions in 21-22, actually looking very similar to prior to COVID in 18-19, which is the difference of about 10 suspensions between those two years. And I'll turn it over to Laura.
Hello, everyone. And then that second bullet really has more to do with some of the action steps that we talked about during the school year last year that came out of that rethinking PBIS and school discipline work group. And a couple of the highlights from that included the series of the culturally responsive teaching and evidence-based effective classroom practices, PD series, that we did through that webinar format, because at that time, that was just kind of the best format for ongoing. And then went through a process to get stakeholder and district staff input to create a district major and minor chart that aligned with the Iowa Department of Education majors and minors. And there were several other action steps, probably a few too many to put on that slide, from that Rethinking School Discipline work group that are ongoing and that we're continuing to implement over a longer multi-year plan. But those were a couple of the highlights of things that were accomplished last year in that preventative, proactive realm.
All right, and another way that we work as a school district to get input from our constituents and our public stakeholders is to hold a yearly SIAC meeting, which is the School Improvement Advisory Committee. So that meeting was held last year on March 2nd, where we reviewed the Iowa State Community School District Strategic Plan and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Plan, and just different data around how we were seeing things in our district to gather input from our stakeholders. And then through that meeting, we were able to come up with some recommendations that were made to the board at that time around what the public would like to see as part of our school programming.
Okay, so the wellness report. Our wellness committee meets at least once a year, and that committee is made up of a diverse group of district employees that provide oversight to physical education, nutrition services, and health services as well. And this year, our goals are just to remain focused on providing continuing education on healthy snacks in schools and physical activity and healthy living for our students.
So we did our rollout for restorative justice as part of the equity report. And we are continuing with that, so we're in the second year of that. We did lots of re-entries and worked with our RJ coordinator, equity team members, and building RJ team members by request. We still have that going on continuously now. And we also looked at the DEI plan. And so, as many of you know, over the COVID years, we were kind of like at a standstill with the DEI plan, but technically it's up in 2022. So we're like on hold because of the years with COVID. So right now, we're continuing with that work that we did last year in looking at which ways we need to revise the DEI plan and make sure that we're doing the things that we said we were going to do in there. And then with community outreach at the end of last school year, because of some disruptive things that were happening and volunteers wanting to get involved, the Community Cares crew came out of that, and we continued training people over the summer and in the fall, and we're continuing that work forward. And professional development in the following areas took place last year and is continuing to take place this year, and that's with restorative circles, behavior management, LGBTQIA support, and cultural proficiency.
So may I get with curriculum? So for curriculum, our curriculum review cycle is an 8-year cycle. We did this summer we did PE, and then we also did the counseling and social emotional learning. Was the two programs that we reviewed this past year. Lindsay Shekelbar was the curriculum coordinator that worked with the counseling and social emotional learning, and Jan Grenkel was the counselor that worked with the curriculum coordinator that worked with physical education. We also do have part of our curriculum review team when we do our self-study team, which tends to be after year 2. That self-study team is comprised of parents, students, school building administrators. We also do have some teachers, our curriculum coordinators, representatives of the equity team, and then also board members. So we had Director Clausen, who was part of our counseling and social emotional learning team last year, And we did have Director Eastman, who was part of our PE, our physical education team last year too. And so part of the curriculum review cycle, what comes out of that self-study report is there's data that we do throughout the year. We do, this year we're incorporating some focus groups of students. But there, through all of the data that we pull, we identify our strengths and limitations of our program, and then with those limitations, the curriculum review teams helps to create an improvement plan. And that's the improvement plan that works throughout the cycle for the remaining years of the cycle until we run through the cycle again. And so part of that improvement plan that was created for physical education and counseling and social emotional learning has already been implemented. We're already doing some portions of that. We took some student voice in consideration for the physical education, and so as of next year, we'll be adding 3 additional PE courses at the junior high level. So students have a variety of choices when they select PE classes. And then for counseling and social emotional learning, we did implement, of course, we have lessons, social emotional learning lessons that are being implemented during advisory at homeroom. So those are some of that part of that came out of that improvement plan. For this year, this summer, we're currently working right now on the K-12 math, our English language learners group, and then also for our health curriculum. And so for math, we have Heidi Anderson, who is our curriculum coordinator for that program. ELL, we have Sheila Niels. And then for health, we also do have Lindsay Schuckerberg, who's also working, who was also the counseling and social emotional learning coordinator. He's also our health coordinator. And we're thankful also that we do have Director Kosha Hayek, who is part of our health team this year. We have Director Eastman, who is part of our ELL team this year too. And then we also do have Director Abraham, who's working with our math team. To put that in place, so the core improvement plan will be submitted and done by July of 2023. And then we have the 5-year strategic goals, and I'm going to start from growth and work my way up to equity. So you can see from right now we're looking at 2027 is when we're hoping to make sure that all of our 5-year growth strategic plans we can achieve what we have established, what you see in writing for equity, proficiency, and for growth. Our goal is between 2023 and 2027 to reach, we want to impact that right away, so the goal is to move to have a growth of 60% for all of our students and maintain that 60% or above for the next 5 years. And so we're currently sitting at, state average is 50%, our goal for this year is to be at 60%. In math and reading, we're at 55 and 52% right now for this year. And so the goal is to hit 60% as of this year and then continue to grow or maintain at that 60% for the next 5 years. With regards to proficiency, you can see that also we do have a goal for 2027 for 80% of our students to be proficient in math and reading on their ISAPS assessments. Right now we're currently at, for math, at 67%, and for reading we are at 74%. And so the growth there for proficiency will go for reading. If we go to that 80%, we're looking at a 6% increase in that growth. And then for proficiency for math, you can see that we have 2 numbers up there. We have a 75% and an 80%. And yes, our goal is to reach that 80%, but that is a 13% increase, which we felt that was a more attainable number. In those 5 years, we'll be at a 75%. Well, we're still reaching and pushing for the 80, but we're looking at a 75 as a more attainable number. That would mean if we're looking at reading, that's a 1.6 growth per year. Sorry, 1.2 growth per year for reading. And if we're looking at math, if we go to the 75%, that pushes us to 1.6 growth per year. So it's a little bit more attainable than the 2.6 growth. And then for equity, understand that we do have gaps for our student groups in ALL, IEP, FRL, and for our race. Our goal is to also increase in all of those areas, and so have just a meaningful growth in all those areas. And so we're just being a lot more intentional. We are very intentional right now, but being more intentional in putting systems and structures of support in place so we can have a sustainable growth throughout the years in all of those areas and have that growth maintain or grow every year.
So I'll just pick up there before they take questions, but this is also a conversation we started in the retreat. You guys looked at the strategic plan document, and you also had saw the measurement tools, the strategies, the purpose conversation, and these were the 3 goals we talked about. And so I tried to take back some of your feedback from that day and share it with the team around how we could write these goals effectively. And so the team did a really great job with thinking about what's actually attainable and reasonable, knowing that our goal is always for all kids, right? I mean, that's always the way we approach our work. That's always our commitment is to all students, but knowing that our numbers are where they're at right now, and then what is attainable in a 5-year time frame. And so I think Carmen did a nice job explaining there that kind of conflict we had between 75 and 80%. I think what we really are recommending, even though you see both there, is 75%, knowing that, yes, we could shoot for the 80%, but it does seem pretty or somewhat unrealistic to think we're going to grow that fast, that quickly over that 5 years to get to the 80%. As we tried to write the equity goal, we really got into a situation where trying to determine those gaps for each of those areas and write a specific goal that would make sense and be something consumable by the community would be either too complex, overwhelming, confusing, not really give us a target of what we're trying to speak to. And so really what we landed on there is what we need to stay committed to is reducing the gaps, and that should be a constant focus for us to know that we have a gap in those areas, and what our focus has to be is that we're trying to accelerate the learning from those groups to make sure we are closing those gaps in our systems. And then finally, the growth one, when we talked about the median state growth is 50%, we're already outperforming the state in growth, which is great to hear at the 52 and 55 rate. But we know for these things to occur in some of those other goal areas that we're going to have to grow faster than that. And so, again, what would seem reasonable would be 60% in those areas. And so the other person that's not here we should give a special thank you to is Diane Schumacher, who really helped us with just a lot of experience, depth, and knowledge around these areas about how to write the goals and make sure they are legitimate and fair, attainable, and also have some backing to them. So that's what we wanted to propose to you for looking at our data from the annual progress report, knowing we have work to do, knowing where we want to go, and then saying this is what we're going to hold ourselves accountable to and measure our progress by. So if those goals look good, as you guys kind of continue your conversation, ask the team questions here, the plan would be at our next November meeting, at that organizational meeting, to really say, here's our strategic plan, right? Here's the goals, and then here's those strategies we want to go about achieving it, which would be a nice kickoff with our organizational meeting too. So with that, I think we'll take questions on anything that was in those teach and learning reports, unless you guys had another piece to add.
So this doesn't work, right? No. So breathe deeply and get my big voice going here. So Matt and your staff, I'm really pleased that we have numerical goals in this plan. To me, in the past, that's been something that's very challenging, and it's scary, I guess. So I'm very pleased that we're willing to put numbers here to give ourselves a good idea of what is actually changing in the classroom and how students are learning more than they were before.
Yeah, thanks for that, Charlie. I think that's it is a little bit intimidating and a little, a bit scary when you think about the fact that we're putting ourselves out there about this is what you're going to be measured against. But the truth of the matter is we also already have measurement tools, right? We're already given a report card by the state. We're already subject to the differentiated accountability mechanism. And so part of it for us is I think when we can set realistic goals, it can also work the other way. It can also build some confidence to say this is what we're actually going after, right? When it's undetermined and it's undefined, we really don't know what goal we're trying to achieve. And so we also have a responsibility, I think, to our staff to state this is what we're trying to do. And this is realistic and it's attainable. And so I think it can inspire confidence and breed confidence in that regard as well. But I appreciate you saying that, and that was something we had talked about at the retreat too.
I think it's a great report that we get. I mean, I know I study it and walk away from it, sit down and read it again, and go away and read it again. It's really thorough. Didn't you say that Amy Gordon-Meyer had a lot to do with it too? Did she?
Yep.
So I'm sure she would have a lot of input or answers to any questions we have. But I'm proud of the presentation you guys gave. I just want to karate chop the air about it because I feel like it was really good. You guys are clearly taking all of this very seriously. Just the professionalism with which you present this information, I just don't think that exists in a lot of places. So I just really appreciate your presentation and the information today.
All right. I don't see see anybody else moving forward to a non-working microphone, so. I think we can move on to our next presentation, which is our middle school update.
And Lucas is going to provide that for us. And now he's had such a buildup from the first one that let's hope he can maintain the same level of success here with the middle school update. But Lucas has been doing a nice job leading this work for us since he's joined the team this summer and picked up some of the other work that Nick had started last year for us and been collaborating with a lot of staff members and a lot of leaders throughout the district. So we're excited to kind of tell you where we're at and some of the plans we're thinking about as we move towards our middle school configuration model.
Is this working?
No, it is.
Perfect. Well, I was getting a little nervous when the boards were not working because that doesn't, this is very conceptual in nature anyways, and then if you don't see a visual, it makes it very difficult to get also. So I would like to thank, I represent the team that has done an outstanding job. We've been meeting pretty much weekly since the middle part of August, kind of going over some different things. Because what we don't want to do is just add 6th graders into an existing building, an existing system. This is a great time for us to rethink how middle schools can look with the addition of our 6th graders into our building. So I appreciate the time to really come to you tonight. I had a chance to go through this with our curriculum coordinators yesterday, so it was a little planning session and practice session for me. So I certainly welcome any questions throughout. Again, it's very conceptual. My past life was 17 years in a middle school. So those 6th through 8th graders are my passion and my love and my craziness. That's my part of life. So really, we have 3 different overview objectives. So I want to start with the introduction and overview, as well as the structure, schedule, and then what our next steps are as a team. So again, I talked about I represent an outstanding team with Nick, Carmen, and Eliza. All of us have been meeting, like I said, weekly, in addition to getting feedback frequently from our current junior high administrators, as well as looking at a planning team that started last spring. We brought them into a meeting earlier this fall and plan to meet with them again throughout the process until the fall of '24, when we expect those 6th through 8th graders into our building. So there's a lot of small words that you probably can't read there. So what we're really centered around is 3 overarching beliefs with this, are aligned with our high reliability schools. So looking first at indicators 1.1 and 1.2, looking at that safe and orderly environment perceived by our students, our staff, and our families. Also looking at 1.4, our collaborative teams, and you'll see that other second overarching belief. And then 1.8, looking at the resources that we have as a district and allocating them appropriately with the middle school transition. Second of which, when you think of middle schools, one of the big things you think about is the teaming concept of how those teachers are working together to address both the social and emotional health of the students as well as the academics. So we took that into account when looking at how a 6th through 8th structure could look. In addition to looking at class offerings, again, this is our perfect opportunity to take a look at what we're currently offering within our junior highs. Look to see what those high interest and high engaging classes would be for our kids if they don't currently exist within our system. Let's look at creating them, as well as looking at eliminating or reducing the number of study halls that are currently existing within our junior highs. I saw some oohs and ahs. All right, so looking at our timelines and updates, and again, this shouldn't be anything new, but as far as where we're at and where we began and where we're going. So you can kind of see where we're at with our timeline as far as how we foresee this rollout looking over the course of the remaining part of this school year, in addition to next school year for those students entering our buildings in the fall, our updated buildings in the fall of '24. When we take a look at what our enrollment would be in these buildings in the fall of '24, this is taking our actual enrollment numbers in our classes and in our buildings. So you can see what those projected enrollments as of a few weeks ago after the certified enrollment was done, what our 3 junior high enrollments would be. So you obviously see they're getting larger by almost 400 at a couple of our schools. So you can see Northwest and Southeast staying somewhat consistent with their enrollment numbers, where North Central is a little bit smaller than that 1,000 mark. All right, so this is when we start to look at conceptually. And if you've never lived in a middle school, this is going to be a little bit new for you, but hold on and just hang with me here for a little bit, okay? So we're looking at a current, obviously our junior highs operate as an 8-period day, and we're not looking at that changing. Our junior highs, the day starts with an advisory intervention time, and we're looking for that to remain the same. So structurally, as far as the building schedule and the bell schedule, really does not change whatsoever. So when we think back to those overarching beliefs, the HRS, our idea of teaming, as well as the idea of allocating allocating our resources and more course offerings, this is where you're going to see it reflected in that. So big picture, you can think of 7th and 8th grade. Our big changes to those grade levels would be the types of offerings our students are going to be taking, extending more opportunities for them, in particular with the electives field. The main part of this is what I want you to, well, spend the majority of the time talking about how 6th grade looks a little bit different. And we talked about the idea of teaming. The transitions from elementary to middle, from middle to high, are important transitions to keep in mind as we go through the idea of teaming and how we structure the day for our 6th graders in particular. So what you see here in an 8-period day, our 6th grade teams are divided into teams of 3. So that means 3 teachers are going to work together to teach the areas of ELA, teach the areas of math and science. So what you see here in that 6th grade model is you have 3 teachers, one focuses solely on ELA, one focuses solely on math, and then the other teacher teaches both science and social studies. So the unique part about a 6th grade teacher typically, or elementary teacher, is they can teach pretty much any subject, K-6, as long as they have that certification and endorsements. 7th and 8th grade gets a little bit more difficult because of the secondary endorsement usually requires a specific endorsement in a certain subject area. So that's why you see 6th grade looking a little bit different. Our current 6th grade teachers most likely have that K-6 elementary, so even though they're teaching that in elementary right now, when we do transition to a middle school, they still have that same ability to teach any subject. I say that, they can teach any subject, that doesn't mean where their strength and their passion is. So that's one thing that we also want to take into consideration when we start to look at staffing and implications in the fall of '24.
So, I'm sorry to interrupt. When I was reading this before the meeting, I was trying to imagine how the kids look. Are they in a classroom together and we rotate 3 team teachers in, and so they pod with the same, 30 kids for the whole day? Or are they rotating through periods like our 7th and 8th graders?
Great question. So you look at a team of 3, you're roughly looking at the 27 to 30 per 1 ratio. So you're looking at a team of 90, roughly right around there, working between those 3 teachers. And those are the same 3 teachers that they had each and every single day. They rotate between those 3 teachers. So obviously you can look at how that building and bell schedule would look, whether they all transition as a cohort, or you have the ability to mix depending on where those electives fall within. So they have the same 3 teachers, and we also wanted to take a look at what's an easy transition, or what's a logical transition between elementary to middle school, is you go from a smaller amount of teachers at the elementary level, then you gradually increase the number of teachers that they're interacting with. One thing I can tell you from experience working with middle school students is when they have a few adults with a few set of expectations that differ a little bit at the elementary, and then you go to all of a sudden 7, 8, 9 different teachers with a different set of expectations, parents that aren't familiar with how to work and how to adjust to those different set of expectations. When you look to gradually increase the amount of students and the adults that they're interacting with, I think you have the better ability to meet with the needs of the students, in particular, again, focusing on the SCPH and the academic.
So 90 of them would kind of be in a cohort together,
Yep.
traveling.
That is a great way to put it, that I should have started, yes.
And so then if we had, whatever, 360, we'd have 4 separate cohorts that would just interact with themselves.
That's correct, and that's assuming the math works out great, right? So, our concept is based upon the idea of some 3-person teams, but we do know in some buildings or some areas there might be the need to either fluctuate fewer or a little bit larger team with that.
But it wouldn't always be the same group of kids, like in English, math, and science. I mean, they might switch in that 90 student cohort.
Yeah, because I could say for myself, I would want to mix it with students throughout the day, right?
That's what we should
absolutely. And one of the things we wanted to keep mindful of is the current existing number of instructional minutes, and you'll see that here on the next slide. So you take a look at the 6 out of the 8 periods of the day for the 6th grade are really taken up by those core areas. The 7th period is that ability for PE as well as music and the idea of exposure units. So I'm going to get to that in just a little bit because that looks a little bit different than electives. So I think a visual will hopefully help explain that a little bit more than me just shooting off the hip here. So the idea of teams, again, in looking at 7th and 8th grade, again, we talked about the idea of endorsements and certifications for our 7th and 8th grade teachers, which gets a little bit more tricky. Teaming, while it's possible in 7th and 8th grade, it becomes a little bit more difficult because of certification and endorsements. So the idea, again, is to team as much as possible, but we do know that when we team at the higher grade levels in 7th and 8th grade, it might be a strain on some of our resources. So we want to be mindful of, leading indicator 1.8. Are we using our resources appropriately? So that's one thing that we want to be mindful of. So you see the days in 7th grade changes a little bit, where The 8-period day focuses on 5 in the core area, and we're adding more opportunities for choice with the electives in 7th grade, and even more so in the 8th grade, where that goes into a 4-period with cohorts. So you can kind of see, again, we're not eliminating and saying no to teams at the 7th and 8th grade level, but that would be a conversation that we have based on the resources and the staff and the students that are in our building. So when we take a look at our current instructional comparison, this chart just gives you an idea of what we did want to do is take the existing MES look within our elementary and totally wiping them out in our middle school. So you can kind of see what that would look like in our current practice within our current elementaries and what that would look like in a middle school setting. Again, I want to keep emphasizing that exposure units that I'll get to here next, but really not limiting or reducing the number of minutes that we're teaching. Those 2 areas of reading and math really stay consistent with that, with how it looks both within the periods as well as how we're going to intervene with students throughout the day as well. So this is where it gets into structures and schedules, and I want to kind of emphasize that all of this is in draft. This is just discussion based, right? We're looking specifically at our middle schools and not looking right now beyond. So this just gives you a graphic representation of what that could look like within our current system, as well if we explore the ideas of quarters or semesters. And I always reference, like we're talking about draft form, we're talking about middle school right here, okay? So we talked about offering more opportunities for our students. If we have a transition from trimesters to quarters, obviously that gives more opportunities for our kids. It takes a 60-day opportunity that our current electives are offered at the junior highs and takes it down to 45. Again, an additional class, an additional opportunity for our kids when we look at the types of courses that are really going to excite them and as far as that are going to guide them into high school when they start to focus more solely on their career pathways. So when we talk about those exposure units, what you see here is a representation of, instead of looking at how 7th grade and 8th grade currently look and they would operate on the trimester or quarter, is we really wanted to expose our students to the 6 different service areas in the career technical exploration with our CTE field and align those classes with that. And what we want to do with that is really give an opportunity to see what those different classes look like within it, so they can start to develop what is their passion area, so when they start to have different electives that they can choose, both in 7th and 8th grade and in high school, they can remember, oh yeah, we had that class for like 30 days, and I love the opportunity to do this, this, and this. So when I'm developing my schedule as a 7th and 8th grader, I can start to keep those in mind, those areas that I've really found the most passionate and the most beneficial. So this is one of the items that we came up with, how we can get kids exposed to all of our careers before they start specializing more so in high school. And one of the things we want to be mindful of is, obviously with our Chapter 12 requirements, we are required to teach art and health at the 6th grade level, as well as music. So those are things we need to be mindful of with the scheduling. So when we take a look at those different opportunities that we could create with those exposure units, art and health would be wrapped into those. Like, we're not just saying art could look a variety of different ways, and as well as health could look a variety of different ways, but since that is a requirement, that is one of the areas that we would look for in the exposures, those 6 different units. It would be included with those Chapter 12 requirements. All right, so when we take a look at what our next steps are, again, we're going to continue to meet on a weekly basis. We got feedback yesterday from our curriculum coordinators, so we've actually tasked them to go back to their teachers and be like, all right, what courses do you love? What courses would you like to see more of, or what changes would you like to see within your current structure? And we're asking that to elementary, junior high, as well as our high school teachers, because we know that there's some areas that we maybe currently are not teaching that maybe we should consider based on high interest and high engagement that are not currently in our program and study. So we are meeting actually with curriculum coordinators again at the beginning part of December just to get receive their feedback from talking with the teachers, and then have that help guide our discussions moving forward with our structure, with our setting. Again, we're continuing to check in with our current junior high administrators, just bounce ideas back off of them. Here's what we're discussing. What kind of things do you want to bring back to us, or what types of things can we consider? Is this something you're on board with, or is this something that you don't want any part of? So we kind of know where to go from there. So we're continuing that discussion with them. Again, we're going to look to be conducting student listening sessions as well as our staff. So obviously we're working right now to get the staff feedback from our teachers and our coordinators. We're going to do that as well with our students, both at the current junior high as well as high school. If you could do junior high all over again, what classes would you love to take? So that way we're getting the feedback from all of our stakeholder groups right now to determine what those courses should look like within the setting. And then we will also, obviously staffing is a big component to this as well. So we will be addressing what the staffing timeline will look like with our staff, is so they have a clear understanding and an early understanding of what that's going to look like when we take the 6th grade from the elementary to middle school, what type of staffing is going to be needed within those buildings. buildings as well, and how you go about expressing interest to move along with the students. So. And I'm at the end of my slides, so questions?
I'm so excited about this. I think as a mother who watched her kids go from a very kind of sheltered and controlled environment in their elementary school and then thrown into junior high where it just they weren't really ready for all of that responsibility and independence. I'm so excited about this transitional year and the way that you've set it up. It's so needed, and the opportunities for these students to explore and find what they love. I think that the sooner that our students find something that they love and that we view that as important, I think that the more that they are going to give us in their other subject areas as well. And I think, going back to our last presentation that I didn't comment on, I think we're going to see numbers change in that area once we have students engaging more in what they love. And so I'm so excited to see everything that you're telling us about, and I can't wait to see it put into action.
Great, thank you.
My two things that I am curious about is, you said something about study hall. I don't know anything about how you're scheduling them, and I know you're doing such a good job, but I know that my kids had 2 study halls in one trimester, for example, in junior high, which doesn't seem like a great system. So I would just hope that that's something that if you can work around that, that would be really good. And then the other hope for me with this system, which I'm very excited about as well, is that it will get kids, teachers, staff, and in large part parents to dig in more into the middle school experience instead of it being just sort of a transitional 2 years. So I think it just happens. I don't know why. And I didn't teach junior high. But I think that is a top priority for all of us when we move to this model. It's to make the middle school experience more meaningful and to get parents to care more about it and to give teachers more time to build relationships with the kids because they're going to have them for 3 years instead of 2.
And I've got my unresearched information, my own philosophy as far as why that happens at the middle school level, but our junior high administrators and our teachers do a great job of getting students connected to their buildings, albeit for 2 years. But I can speak from experience being at Northwest, when they're only there for 2 years, it's really tough to have students have that same connection that they have at their elementaries as well as their high school. So, and one of the consequences, and it's a great consequence of coming up with this, is we've got a better chance for students to feel connected with that building that they're in at that particular time, rather than always thinking back to where they were or looking ahead to where they're at. Gonna be.
So I don't know if they told you, but my eldest is going to be the first class of 6th graders in the middle school model, Lucas. So I am personally invested in making sure that this is really amazing, and I'm really excited with what you've presented tonight and what it looks like. Can we go back a slide? I also want to say I love the idea of quarters. At all of our secondary levels, that's a can of worms that we probably don't want to open tonight. But yeah, no, we don't. But especially at the middle school level, because it gives them more chance to kind of explore and find what they love. My question about the exposure units, are you envisioning that everybody would do, all 6th graders would do all 6 exposure units? Do we think that there's really 10 exposure units and they get to kind of choose 6 of the 10, or they're all the same?
What we would like to do, because part of the opportunity with this is to create classes that don't currently exist. So one of the things that we also want to be is consistent across all 3 of our junior high or middle schools. So no matter what school somebody's attending, they're getting the same opportunity. I think you'll also see that within the program of studies that Carmen and her team are working on. We don't want different opportunities for different students in different buildings. So those 6 exposure units will be the same for all students no matter, and they would just rotate throughout those 6 throughout the year. So there wouldn't be any choice necessarily with a 6th grade selection, with a 6th grade schedule. They're all going through the same 6 exposures.
And then when they get to 7th grade, that's when the electives kick in and
Exactly.
they have a little bit of choice in,
Yep.
in where to go from there.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You know, I think when I taught, sorry Molly, sometimes I think as a teacher, like, what do administrators do all day? Here I am trying to teach, and then maybe when you're a principal, you're like, what are they doing downtown all day? And here we see it, right? And what makes me really excited, I do think quarters work really, really well here at the middle school for that exact reason, because we're looking for broad exposure to a lot of different things and not necessarily digging in deep, which, you know, might be one argument for trimesters at Signer. And I'm not making that argument, just saying it works really well here. What's exciting is, to me, junior high was always just sort of like junior high school. Like literally just a junior version of exactly what happens at high school with, you're in 6th grade and then all of a sudden, boom. And kids aren't ready, right? That's a transitional age. And what this does is it's really intentional, especially differentiating 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade. Each one of those steps along the ways is moving us through a transition. And that, to me, speaks to adolescent development. It speaks to what we're trying to do academically with the way we expose kids to what's available to them. Because I would say, you know, the biggest disappointment I ever have is when I'm talking to a 17-year-old and I'm like, what do you want to do after high school? And they're like, yeah. And they're just, like, go to college? Well, why? And they're missing, and these are, you know, I'm talking about high achieving kids, right? AP kids who are at the top, just having not a real sense of direction, right? Just moving through some expected course of programming with no real reason behind it. And so I think this is where we can have that impact. And then hopefully this, right, will drive what's going to happen at the high school level, because we'll just know more, right? We'll be able to meet the kids where they're at, and then staffing being the real big kind of question mark here, being able to further that exploration and deepen that understanding at the high school level. So it is really exciting. Again, what do these folks do all day? Well, to see this result, especially with middle school, I think we were all on board with that when it brought up, but trying to conceptualize what that looks like, it's like, well, that's what we pay people for. The professionals who are expert, and I think it's really reflected here. So thank you for the work. It just keeps us excited and invested in this model. And again, yeah, the way you guys have this laid out as a transition, it's clicking. It's really clicking for me, and I think it's going to make a big difference for our kids. To something that, like a lot of people, junior high is sort of like everybody. It's like a joke, right? Oh, junior high, everybody hated you. You know, well, maybe one of the reasons people have that idea is because it doesn't really make a lot of sense, and it isn't really a thoughtful. Necessarily, it's just like, well, this is what happens at high school, so here you go. And to watch how we're going to move kids through to prepare them for what's coming is really exciting. And I think it's going to keep us kind of motivated to support this and help support you guys in what you need to make this happen. But it's really exciting to see, so thank you all for this work.
I just want to follow up a little bit on what's been said before. We've had 3 kids go through the school system here, and their report is that junior high was one of the worst 2 years in their young lives. You know, they exaggerate a little bit, but it wasn't the kind of experience they were having in grade school, and it wasn't the kind of experience they eventually had in high school. So these changes, I think, address some of the things that they saw in junior high that didn't sit well with them. Their junior high teachers were good. The junior highs themselves were good environment. But it simply didn't match what they needed at that time of their life. And to me, this is an approach to trying to get a better match.
Must have saw me grab my microphone. I would always say to a lot of our new parents at junior high that not too many of us would ever choose to go repeat our 7th and 8th grade year in life, right? Or that go back to be 12 and 13. That's not the age we would pick to go back to. But I think your points tonight, guys, right around if we can set them on a course that helps propel them into the future, that there's a positive experience that they can recall from that time period about, wow, I found out I was interested in this, or this person really formed an effective relationship with me that inspired me to want to do more for other people. Those are the wins we're looking for, right? And I think this gives us a better chance to do that. We do have too many study halls in our system. You know, we have too many of those problems that we know have been perpetual for us. We don't have enough connections with parents. And so I think the team's put together a great plan here about how we can, even like Director Finch was talking about that 6th grade experience, right? How do we be sensitive to that, but also try to address these other problems we know and have been at the middle level. And we have great people in our junior highs, right, that are going to just hit this and knock this out of the park for us and provide great experiences. Our coordinators are going to come with great opportunities. When we talk about our focus to CTE, the fact that we can align an exposure course to each of those CTE areas to start to develop kids' interests and abilities, that's going to impact us in our high schools too, about what we should be offering or things we should be looking at. So we're really excited about it too. I like the link at the beginning, right, to our HRS indicators about the work we need to do, which I think mirrors all of the conversation we've been having, right? It's all connected. So thanks for the comments on it. Big kudos to the team for putting this together and getting us this far. And again, like Lucas talked about too, there will be further engagement, right, with our staff. Not all of the staff has seen this. We wanted to get it to you guys first outside of some of those planning teams that have been involved with it. And, you know, so there could be some adjustments or some evolution of it, but we feel like we have a good starting point.
The only thing I would add to what you're is if we have significant SES disparity in our 3 junior highs as we're looking at these with our report, and we know the effect of SES on performance, that when we're looking at staffing and opportunities at our junior highs, if there is a disparate SES that's pretty obvious, that we make sure we lean into the higher FRL schools with our staffing and our options, because we need to do something to provide additional support to the schools that have bigger obstacles to learning. So I just look at this as I'm a little nervous about staffing. I love all of the opportunities. And so when in doubt, let's make sure we're giving those opportunities and that staffing to the schools that already have additional disparate obstacles to learning. And that will be controversial, but I want it to be something that we're thinking about.
But we even have a way in a system about how we handle that, right? And so I think we can use some of those same philosophies to continue to look at our secondary model. We've done that for secretarial and supervision support at the secondary level with the RAM philosophies that we use at the elementary. And so I think that's a good starting point for us to keep those things in mind, especially as now we have larger campuses and that disparate impact could be a little bit different. So I think for us, when we look at that staffing, it could lead us to implement more of those similar philosophies at the secondary level too.
Yeah, so you mentioned RAM, which is exactly one of the things I'm thinking about, because we don't implement RAM in secondary. We do certain things.
For those two, yeah, that's all, but not necessarily for, like you're talking about, classroom FTE, right?
Right,
Yep.
so I just want us to be thinking about that, because I think we know the projections of our numbers in our junior highs and our high schools. And we do need to think about supporting 2 of the 3 schools in a certain way.
All right, well, thank you very much for the presentation, and I think we are ready to move on to our discussion item, which is our legislative priorities. And our new Standing Strong for Public Education 2022 brochure is on board docs, and I would open it up to the directors for discussion. Well, did you want to kick us off with any?
Yeah, she did. Yeah. She did a great job with it. So we just tried to make sure this mirrored the conversation you guys had here at a couple meetings ago by now, and to talk about the upcoming 2023 legislative session. The only other thing I'd add kind of around this similar issue is we will be doing those legislative forums again, where we'll invite folks on those Fridays once the legislative session starts to come down and participate and have a conversation with us. But this gives us talking points for ourselves and for the community around things that are important to us in public ed. And so if there's something missing there, you don't like the way something's worded, it's not like we've distributed these yet at this point, we can certainly make adjustments. You don't even have to give us all those at the board table. If there's some tweaks or some adjustments, you would want to email us, Kristen and I would sure look at those and make sure we get that reflected accurately. But I think we've captured the overall spirit of the things you guys were talking about. And if there's something that, you don't like the way it's worded, and I appreciated Brady's comments at the beginning too about the restoration of chapter 20. That's not even on the radar for most folks, right? And we know that's probably not likely to happen, but at the same point, if we don't talk about it, it's easy for people to forget, I think, about how long this assault on public education's happened, right? This is not something that's happened overnight. This has been a long-term play from the state to get us where we're at today. And so I think keeping those issues in front of people provides some good historical reference about why we are where we are today.
I was just going to grab my microphone. That isn't working. That's what I do. And Brady, I appreciate what you said too about, we've got a lot of new legislators in the legislature, and so it's an opportunity for relationships, but also in this area, we've got a lot of new legislators. Mary Masher, who was a teacher, is no longer going to be in the State House. So that's an opportunity as well as, I think, a responsibility. I think sometimes I certainly got in the mindset like, well, if Mary Masher's there, somebody who knows education, who's a very strong advocate, that's a relief. That helps me, even though that's not my representative. I just know her presence at the State House was a powerful one for these issues. So that'll be our job too. I know a lot of those new folks elected have reached out to the board and sent us emails about, hey, and certainly just knowing where those folks stand on education, I think we have some strong allies, but then I do think something like Chapter 20 probably takes some education to help folks understand where that came from. There's a long history to that law, and it was very much a law that was built in compromise. It was passed out of when Republicans had a trifecta, when they had all three branches, they passed that law. And so that history of that being not this sort of politically sort of one-sided piece of legislation, but really a spirit of compromise and moderation built into the law to help people understand where that came from. And maybe, this is one issue, public education, where we will find some common ground from folks all across the state who don't want to see their public dollars leave their communities because they don't have the private school options that a lot of places have. So I think there's room, and when we go to the State House, I think, there's an opportunity there to have some of those conversations. And so that's why, I appreciate the support to keep the restoration of collective bargaining. I appreciate that, obviously Chris and the work putting this together. It just makes it so readable and easy. What we say up here, all this jumble, and you're like, this concise, beautiful piece of work that we can really then use and get out there. So I appreciate it. And then I hope we take that opportunity and not be, doom and gloom. I'll be honest, I was spending some time going through some doom and gloom here in Iowa and going through my process. But the truth is, these issues are important to all kids across the state, and I think we will find common ground on a lot of these issues. Mental health affects everyone, and this is one way that I think we can help our communities across the state. So I appreciate that we do this, and I'm gonna, really work to be optimistic about how we can have this conversation with people and tell the stories, because that's what they really need at the the last thing they need at the legislature is us telling them we need more money. They hear that all the time. But if we can tell a story about what that's for and what it means, I think that's really impactful to help people understand what does public education mean in our communities all across the state. And this document and these conversations really help us do that.
Kristen, I almost emailed you when I saw it for the first time a couple days ago because it's so perfect, like no notes. It's really, I think that you took everything that we said and you put it on this paper, and I thought it did a great job of telling the story about why these are our priorities. So thank you so much for your work on that. And I agree, JP, we have allies, but because they don't have that Mary Masher experience, we really need to provide them with some education and so that they can effectively advocate our positions in Des Moines, because I think there's a knowledge gap that we've lost with Mary's departure. I wonder if we could get those dates, the Friday dates, out to them as soon as possible, especially if they are newly elected, maybe their calendars haven't filled up quite yet, and we can get those sessions on them so that we have a good turnout there. And then my question is, how are we going to use this amazing thing that Kristen put together? Like what, I mean, we're going to put it on the website, but it's so effective, I feel like we need to do more with it. We need to get this into people's hands that live in other UEN districts and other, you know, mid-city districts. Like, I feel that the people in our, you know, Washington, Iowa, and Burlington, and Keokuk should understand why preschool is great and why mental health funding is important. So I guess my question, what can we do with this now that we have it, other than put it on the website?
So something we've talked about in the past about different legislative issues is whether or not the superintendents are exchanging this kind of information. You guys have a special club?
Lots of them.
Okay, so you can share it out. But in all seriousness, that's what it's going to take in Iowa to make a total shift, change, whatever word you want to use. So I think that that's something, you know, maybe superintendents are doing, but boards also. There's, you know, for example, when we sent out that letter to the editor, we did, I don't know, was that last year? I think it was last year. Remember what that was? I sent it to like every newspaper all around the state. Well, we can send this to every board. I mean, that's easy. We can just find it and send it, and with a cover letter that says, hey, we're all in this together. We need big change. We've got a positive attitude about it, which I like. Like you, I'm still coming out of the gloom, but we have to have a positive attitude. And Brady, you had a great way of saying that. You said, look, these are new people. Let's build new relationships, right? Who knows? So let's get that kind of cover letter out with this attached to it. It can be sent by email to every board president, and they can give it to all of their board members. Something to that effect. That's totally doable.
Well, you know, just to that point, Maka, so we're going to IASB, a lot of us, and we'll probably, in the past, they have mirrored a lot of, not Chapter 20, but a lot of these have been mirrored by IASB's legislative priorities. And then on top of that, we're part of the UEN, and they also will put out a set of legislative priorities. And so we'll see literally tomorrow how much of this aligns, and then decide how we want to help contribute to that outside of those structures that, you know, where I think we'll see a lot of these are going to probably mirror some of their priorities. Outside of the one that we add in there, they might have some of the exact same ones, but again, how do we amplify that, and how do we?
Yeah, I think it's the cover letter. I think when you say, so this is our strategy, this is, you know, we have to do this together. We have to make a change in the direction our state is going. So, you know, as a political strategist, that's something some of us have thought about. I think we have to do it. We have to get other boards to get fired up and positive to make a change.
Because we're talking about the future of our state.
Yeah.
We're talking about what our communities are going to look like. We're not talking about, earlier tonight we talked about numbers, and I know that those numbers are very important, but that doesn't always translate into a productive adult. I mean, you can get the best numbers possible on those tests, and you might wind up in prison. And prison costs a lot more money than educating a child for a year. What we're talking about is creating functional citizens who engage in democracy, who are involved in their communities, who have caring relationships and families, and contribute to society. And this is the future of our state. And that's something that maybe we should include in that cover letter.
Well, I think you could also think about mayors in a sense, right? Like a lot of school boards may be more in tune to some of these issues than other elected officials in local geography or local geographic areas. And so you may think about also distributing it to them and then talking about, I think what was effective against the vouchers issue last time, right? Which I think we're all worried about this legislative session, was the combination between the urban and the rural about being jointly against that effort. And so I really think trying to build those bridges and those relationships between inviting them for a conversation following, so it doesn't seem also that it's like the big district talking to the little district about what they should do. I think we got to be very sensitive to that as well, because they're proud and they feel very strongly about some issues that we may not have on our list as well, right? And so I think just about how do we continue to build those bridges between our urban and rural, because I feel like that's where some divide has been created in an intentional way, right? To try to make us seem very different and that we're not advocating for the same things, but we really are, right? Just like Jane said, I mean, we're all trying to do that work. And so the more we can remember that we're alike in that way, that our goals are alike in that way, I think the more success we'll have about advocating that. So, and again, your points about a new group of legislators and having to provide some education and some background on some of these things, about things that are important to us and why they've been important to us, I think will be an important part of those legislative sessions too. So I think even for us, as we think about stepping into those, it might not be just relying on them to give us an update about what they're doing, but thinking about how we're maybe a little bit more intentional in some of the work we're sharing with them to help continue that conversation. So those are a few things. We can take a crack at a cover letter a little bit about, okay, what would lead into this, and just describe, hey, we're the Iowa City Community School District. We wanted you to see what we were working on. We'd be interested to know what you're working on. Here's how you can contact us if you want to continue the conversation, but here's a flyer we've put out to try to advocate. Or we'll take a crack at that and have you guys maybe review that at the next one, and we'll get those legislative forums scheduled. I think sometimes we try to do the first one in December, if not for sure January. So we'll be getting those scheduled now that we know who we're sending the invites to.
I very much like the idea of us thinking about what should we take to those meetings, because I think if we can do a good job of pushing certain narratives and issues, that's what we're here for, and we can take advice from the admin about the issue that might be the primary issue of that meeting or something, and then we walk in ready to give a 2-minute synopsis of the issue and why we're concerned about it.
All right, so we will then move on to our one action item tonight, and that is a resolution to approve application for modified supplemental amounts for LAT excess costs. And Superintendent Degner, since I don't see Les here, I'm wondering who's going to talk to us about finances.
Yeah, Chase was really excited to talk about this one tonight, earlier today. So either of us are happy to answer any questions, but this is basically our request back to the SBRC for modifying those amounts. So if you guys have any questions about the specific process or the approval, please let us know. And Chase, if you have anything you want to add, go ahead.
You already shared everything.
Okay.
No, this is actually just part of that standard process, like Matt said, with special ed. We've seen an increase in our students that receive these services over the last couple of years, which also helps articulate the numbers you see in the document. But most importantly, this is a standard process that we go through on an annual basis.
I have a question about a disparity that I see in the numbers that are between these two documents. Maybe I'm looking at it wrong. In the letter, which is Board Action on Limited English Program Allowable Cost, it says that we're asking for an allowable cost amount of $2,644,362.60. And in the other document before us, it's titled LEP Excess Allowable Cost, so forth. In that document, let me see if I can find this for sure. Down on line 17, Chase, can you see this?
I do. Yes.
Preliminary maximum allowable request. That number is $2,944,000. $2,944,362. So the difference of $300,000 between those two numbers. And it seems to me that in the second document, that shows the maximum allowable request. And the letter that we, or the resolution we have before us, doesn't have that full amount in it. So I must be misunderstanding something between these.
How much you guys wish Les was here right now?
As much as Les is disgruntled with me, maybe it's as though it's not his. So anyway, so maybe I can't spring this on you and expect an immediate answer or Chase. But I just wondered, if you look into that and see if there is some discrepancy, or if there's not, if there must be some obvious explanation about why the amount we're requesting might seem to be below the maximum amount we could request.
So I will go back and check, Charlie with us on that, but the way I read line 17 is that this is a document we brought from the state, and based on our numbers, it says let's pull wrap this up, and this is not the preliminary maximum allowable request, and so that's what that number is, and so I can check with Les of why we're requesting the 2644 instead of the 2944.
Yeah, I was looking back last year to see if it was a document error, but last year's request, November 15th, 2021, was 2649,178.11. And so I think it's closer to what Chase just said, that the maximum we need there is what's reflected in the second attachment, but what we're actually asking for is in the document, in the cover letter. I was worried we maybe had an error in the document, but I don't think that's what it is, because it's not the same numbers from last November.
And the second question I have, more general, about this is that, as I understand it, the state allows us to recover costs above the supplemental aid amount for these this instructional program. So are we really trying to get the maximum numbers of teaching positions that the state will allow us to pay with this supplemental money for this program?
That's what I say. Yes is the easy answer. That's why you would see us post a special ed opening at any time and EL opening at any time and have no problems filling those, because they're categorical funds. So when we get to this agenda setting portion of the meeting next, I'm going to talk to you about a budget work session next week, or at our next meeting that won't be as fun. But really, when we have an EL need or we have a special ed need, that's not going to be a concern the same that a general ed FT is going to be a concern to the budget, because it's funded through categorical dollars. So as we get more students, we go back with these late requests to get the funding to reflect those students, and then we can always hire the appropriate staff to do that. Sometimes certification is what holds us in the way around special ed and ELL. That creates the challenge. Not that we don't have the funds to support the staff we need to go get.
Okay, great, okay.
What's the time frame? Usually these come in, and or not usually, often there's a pretty tight time that just because it's a 6 and a 9, I would hope that wasn't an error, because all the other numbers are exactly the same. So do we know the timeliness of this, or the time constraint?
So it's, yes, so the resolution will be included in the SBRC action on December 13, 2022. Last year, I think Matt informed the board that given some of these expenditures, we got a letter from the SBRC, and Matt, Leslie, and I had the opportunity to go and speak with them, actually over Zoom. And we'll do the same thing again this year, but it's in December of this year when we show that information to the SBRC.
Does that, I think to Director Clausen's point, can we table it tonight to make sure it's the right number and then put it on the November 29th agenda? Would it be smarter to vote on it as it is now and then we amend it on November 29th if we have to? What options do we have moving forward? Because we also don't want to shortchange us $300.
I think sorry, Chase, I was going to suggest what we'd actually, I think, like you guys to consider is approving the request for the higher number And then if we need to submit the request at the lower number, we'll do so. And so tonight, if you could take action, I am a little bit worried about the timeliness of the date, the fact that it's on this meeting, because Les had asked us to wait on a couple other reports for next meeting. And so if you're okay approving the higher amount at the 2.9 number that's in there, and then obviously we'll only make the request for what we need to do. So if at least we have the authorization from you to go up to that number, and then if we need to come back with the lower number, that's what we'll do.
Then I would, if there's no other comments, I would entertain a motion.
I move that we pass the resolution to approve application for modified supplemental amounts for excess LEP costs in the amount of $2,944,362.60.
Second.
All right, and we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
All right. Let's move to the end of our agenda, director liaison report. Did anybody want to comment on any of their activities in this month? All right. Let's go to agenda setting.
A few things to put on your guys' radar, and then maybe it'll take some things off your mind. But we had at one point had an IntelliSea contract that was loaded on the consent agenda, and we decided to table until we could do a presentation. We'd like to come back with that for the 29th. You'll, of course, have the organizational meeting. There we'll be recommending legal services for the district. If you remember, we put out an RFP for that. So we'll give you guys some advance notice of who we'll be recommending and give you an opportunity to contact Chase or I with some questions, but we will have that recommendation there for you on the 29th. The other two pieces in the regular meeting, I think, will be the SBRC documents that Chase was talking about before, and so we'll have to appear again in front of the Department of Ed because of how tight our unspent balance is when considering our categorical funds like we were just talking about. If we don't factor in special ed and ELL, we're actually a very razor-thin margin on what our unspent balance is, so the DE calls us in to check on us about what we're doing in that regard. So you'll have an item loaded on there, as well as the financial health report and the CAR report that'll be there. You don't have to capture all these. Kim and I will get these down. So that's another item. And then the strategic plan that we talked about tonight, we'd like to have the actual whole document there for you, and probably ask for some board approval of that so we can commit to that in a public way. But then the follow-up the meeting, we'd like to do a budget work session with you all and talk about what the budget picture looks like here for the upcoming year and probably even for the following year to talk about that. So those would be a few things we had on our list. I don't think I forgot anything that the team talked about here earlier today, but with the organizational meeting and with those pieces, we'll have probably a pretty full conversation that night.
I know that's a full night. Could we also put a quick preschool update?
Yes. Yep.
On the 29th? Anybody else want to add to the 29th? Or future work? Anything anybody wants to put on our radar for future meetings? All right. And then the P&G's meeting on the 29th. That agenda seemed fine, all set. I think that's it. All right. If no one has anything else, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, Lisa.